we do nothing in this business without money.
Today's guest believes buildings should do more than just look good. They should serve people, grow communities, and most importantly, last. He has worked in most real estate sectors, including, but not limited to, commercial, industrial, hospitality, and residential projects across the country. In today's episode, we'll talk about his method that combines profit with purpose in every project and how he's building smart systems with community feedback to fulfill long-term visions. Michael, if you weren't a real estate developer, what do you think you would be today and why?
I don't know. This is all I've ever done. I got into this not by plan, but through a little bit of fate and a lot of following my heart. I don't think there's really much else I really could or would do if I couldn't to do this. Maybe I'd retire on a beach somewhere, but rent scooters in Costa Rica. But I just love what I do, and I have literally been doing it since college. So it's hard to imagine doing something else.
Great. What makes you different from other developers? What's your superpower?
So mostly it's our approach. We feel like what we do affects generations experience our world, right? So it's a lot of responsibility to engage in real estate development, and you handle a lot of resources. Those resources can be put to use in various ways, and we like to really approach it from a community first standpoint. Really, what is happening in each community that we're visiting? Who's doing what? Who's engaged? Who's not engaged? Who's displaced? And who's making investments? And try and work within all of those contexts to craft investments that are resilient and are purposely driven to work with the existing community. So what that means is that we don't have a product type in mind, where most developers, they do apartments, or they do student housing, or they do self-storage, or they do medical office, or they do industrial. We will do whatever it takes to have the best investment in the best location that we feel is dynamic enough to invest in. So that gives us the opportunity to do office, hotel, assisted living, and it gives us the ability to put resources behind true community endeavors based on each community, and not just a one solution for all approach.
Amazing. So what made you choose real estate? As you mentioned, that was something that you always wanted to do since college. You're doing it. So why did this career interest you? What was the something that really hit you and wanted to do this?
What first really struck me is I grew up on Long Island in New York in the 80s and 90s, and I watched the super malls and the supermarts, they take over the world, right? And all the little towns and all the little downtowns were all vacant. When I was a kid, all the little shops, the mom and pops, the restaurants, they knew me, they knew my grandfather, they knew my parent. Like, those disappeared one by one in exchange for highways and giant malls. And that didn't sit right with me from the very beginning as a child. When I learned that there was this thing, that real estate and this movement to change those things, to bring back our downtowns, to reinvest in our local communities, it really struck me. And that's really what got me excited to start that work.
How do you choose where to build your next project? What matters most to you in making that choice?
There's a number of factors that you have to weigh. We always have to weigh if something is feasible, if it's financeable, right? It has to be doable, or it's worth, maybe it's not doable today and it's doable in the future. But the general idea is, are there dynamics that make a project workable? But first, before we do that, we look for communities that we want to be a part of, right? I'm sitting in a building in Pilsen in Chicago right now that had been abandoned for a generation. And now there are dozens and dozens and dozens of office workers in this building because we saw the potential in the community and the need in the community to build something that would create jobs and reflect the population that lives here and serve the population that lives here. So we bring those things together. Like, how do we make now an office project, Class A loft office in a sub-market or neighborhood of Chicago that the big brokers don't even cover as an office sub-market, right? How do we bring that life into it? And it's mostly by building on the life that the residents have already built here and embracing what's so special about each neighborhood. So when we start there and we really fall in love with the location, then we can craft a project that works in almost any location, because we really just focus on the specialness of the people in the place first, and then just build within it.
That's something not everybody think of. What's the toughest part of being a real estate developer, and how do you deal with it when things get really hard?
Doing what I just said is also the toughest part. And so we have to we have to reinvent ourselves. We have to reinvent our investors. We have to reinvent our lenders. We have to reinvent our management team in every project we do. That's difficult, right? We're also coming, we like to come into new communities that we haven't worked in before. And we then have to build trust. We have to establish ourselves as community stakeholders. We have to be authentic in what we're learning and what we're giving back. That is difficult work. It's hard work. It's emotional work. It is blood, sweat, and tears sometimes, and many times. And we're almost always treated with mistrust when we first get there. We may not look the same, we may not talk the same, or just the fact that we're real estate developers and investors puts a big target on us just to start. And that's fair, because there's a lot of things that have happened in the past that real estate development and developers have been a part of that have not been positive, that have some overtly negative. We've been in Pilsen we had been in Pilsen for 2 years, meaning eating here, getting to know people here, visiting here, meeting not-for-profits and the community members and the aldermen, for 2 years before we even decided to build a project here. Right. So then that informed us what we thought would work and what we thought would fit and we thought would be accretive to the community. And then we started looking for the buildings and the opportunities to do that in. It's just difficult to do that. It's difficult to sustain. But in the end, it creates a much more resilient project. There's no question about it. We just proved it here at Mural Park. We just refinanced an office product in a sub-market of Chicago. And in the same month, we moved in a 14,000 square foot office user just a few weeks ago. So brand new office space, fully built out for them. It continues to prove that our work up front will pay off with this project in the end.
Great. So how do you balance this profit? Like, you're building something and you need to make money as well, like to build next project. So how do you manage that and doing something good for the community?
So it's just being thoughtful up front. When a developer has their building that they already want to build and their plan and their pro forma, and they're just looking for a piece of land to plunk it down on, they haven't made room for any creativity. It's really, it's fully baked. When we start from scratch, we can build in that community presence and essence into the project from the very beginning. And that is less expensive to do when you build it in authentically from the origin. And it's also more meaningful in the end. You're not just cutting a check to an affordable housing fund, which may be well enough usable and good. But instead of doing that, for example, in Evanston, we realized that nobody was doing any workforce development. So we built a luxury assisted living. It's all private pay. It's very difficult to be affordable in any capacity because there's 100 people working there. So we said, what if half of them at least were residents of Evanston? And we put people to work and we trained them how to do hospitality and how to do healthcare and how to move up in a huge growth industry where they could walk to work. And we do. We have currently 50 Evanston residents living in a building that has 130 Evanston residents living there. So now we've got 180 Evanston residents in a single building, 3 generations wide, right? That are all interacting in downtown Evanston every day. We couldn't have done that had we not thought about that kind of thing from the very beginning, and built a project that would employ. Because if I just did an apartment building, there'd be 4 employees. But instead, I designed a project that I knew would do well from a market standpoint, and we built one of the highest end assisted livings in Illinois. Right. I knew it would do well there, but I needed to figure out how it would work with the community, and that's what we crafted.
Right. So when it comes to building something, when you're deciding to build something, I mean, a lot of industries, a lot of businesses are involved, like designers and builders, general contractors. So how do you get everyone to work together as a team and follow the same plan?
I like to say my job is I'm not the quarterback of a project. I'm the coach, right?
Hmm.
So it's my job to try and call the plays, but in the end, I'm facilitating the team to work together in their roles to get something done. So the architect can't make decisions that the pro forma doesn't support, right? The management company has to work within what we've designed. The leasing brokers have to understand the vision. So there's a lot of team members on these big projects, and we do projects, between 20 and $100 million in general is our sweet spot. There's a lot going on there, and it's not just me. I have partners and team members on the development side that help manage this stuff. But we set the tone early from the beginning, build the team around purpose, right? We want our architects, our engineers, our consultants to be invested in what we're doing. And then, it works itself out. There's always issues that come up, especially here in Chicago. There's lots of complications and nuances to being a developer here and working with the city and each community, each ward separately. That is really challenging and fulfilling when we get it right.
What do you do when a project takes more time or money than you thought it would? So how do you handle it and keep things moving?
Luckily, we try to avoid that, and we're pretty successful at avoiding that by spending enough time up front working on the project and the deal. What we do generally requires a lot of community engagement and entitlement time, and that entitlement time gives us time to continue to massage the numbers and work with what's there. When we built Truly Evanston, we had it designed as a steel building, but at that time, steel was skyrocketing and cast in place concrete was plummeting. So we actually did an emergency redesign of the structure of the building into a cast in place building from the steel, and we saved about $20 a foot, which was really significant when it's a 250,000 square foot building. So there are moments where you have to make tough choices and spend real dollars to redesign to make sure that you've got your project set up for success. We broke ground on March 9th of 2020 on that project. We immediately realized that the COVID pandemic was going to affect what we were going to be able to build and how to build it. And we started looking at where our products were coming from, how to adjust, switch manufacturers, buy locally, and buy in stock versus custom order. And we got the project done on time and $1 million under budget in the heart of the pandemic, when people weren't allowed to leave their houses. We had 100 people in a building a big building. And we were able to do that with constant diligence, constant awareness, and constantly testing where this came and where that came from and where that came from. And our contractors at the time, Valenti Builders, were amazing at keeping pace with that and making recommendations for that and getting their subs to work with it. And really, it came out beautiful.
Great. I mean, that was tough times, and you went through it perfectly. So you've been in the industry for 25 years. Was there ever a project you were emotionally invested in that didn't go as planned? What happened, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, well, you want to make a banker laugh, tell him your plans, right? To adjust an old saying. Um, like nothing goes to plan, right? You're in this industry. Your plan is a loose one. Um,
Mhm.
you have definitive pieces that people commit to. You make commitments, and you take that first step, then you take the next step, and then you take the next step. I'm emotionally involved in all of my projects because I won't do any that I'm not emotionally involved in. Uh, what that does is it sets me up. And this is a specific principle of Condor Partners. It is a founding principle of Condor Partners that we won't do a project that if we woke up and it was 2009 all over again, or if it was 2024 all over again, and we thought there was no way we were ever going to make a dime on a project, but we would still wake up and passionately work on that project for the project's sake, for the community's sake, for our investors' sake, that we would continue to do that. And we did do that. And we are persisting, and we are now coming out of that on an end of a project that we thought we may not have ever seen. But that's the secret there. Is everything's going to go wrong every time, right? Because you just can't plan the duration of time and the effects that our government, elections, natural disasters, insurance markets, you just can't plan those things, right? So you just have to plan for alternatives, and you just have to be aware and creative. Admit that there's an issue quickly so that you can find a resolution before it's too late.
Basic answer. So let's talk about Mural Park. You said it felt like a second chance. Why was that moment so important?
Because the project's important, right? I mean, like we're bringing 400 jobs to a community where 12,000 out of 13,000 people have to leave the neighborhood to go to work every day. When the community asks, where are my old bakeries that I went to with my grandfather? Where are the old residents? Where are the old shops? It's it's because all the jobs left, right? That people had to take trains and buses and cars and scatter and put their kids in daycare and, spend time commuting and buy lunch or cocktails after work elsewhere. We're bringing people back here that want to be here, companies that are invested here, got a ton of not-for-profits that service the community here, whose employees live here, right? That's why it's important, right? That's the work that we're trying to do. Um, and that's where the emotion comes from, right? We were we were able to prove that our philosophy, the way we do business, is more resilient than almost any other office project in this city, right? We're one of the most dynamic office buildings. We're signing leases. We're putting in new tenants. We're refinancing. We are doing the work because of the work that was put in up front.
So how did the neighborhood or community play a role in helping make Mural Park a success?
They told us they didn't want us. um, and we said why, and we started a dialogue, an actual conversation. Right, people who disagreed with us being here were willing to sit down and tell us why. And we were willing to sit down and listen. And what we heard was we need jobs. They didn't even know they were saying it at the time, right? They were making observations. They were telling us what's happening, but they weren't equating it into real estate terms. What we were able to do is listen to the government, to elected officials, to planning and zoning, and the community, and the older residents of the community and the newest residents of the community, and say, okay, let's think about this in terms that we can come together around, right? We're not going to address luxury housing and displacement. We're not tax credit developers. So we're really not qualified to say, oh, we can build affordable housing. But what we can do is commercial development, and we can focus on jobs, and we can tell a story that correlates with your values here. Um, and that information helped us craft the idea of an office project where no one was crazy enough to do an office project. And then a few years later, Blue Cross Blue Shield signs a 100,000 square foot lease with us to move out of the loop and into Pilsen.
I mean, you're right. Listening plays an important role. When you listen, you understand, then you come to conclusion. You really understand when you listen to somebody, what's their concerns, what they really need. And you're right on that. I mean, that makes sense. That was a point which helped you to be successful in that project. In projects like Mural Park or Truly Winston, were there any tools or technologies that really made a difference in how the building worked or made more money?
So the technology for Mural Park is pretty simple. It's a brick and timber building, and we wanted to keep it as authentic as possible. Truly was a brand new construction during COVID. I mean, we couldn't even get inspectors to come to the building. So we had to use all kinds of new technology in building that building while we were under construction, where we were filming our installations. We were geotagging, and spatially dimensioned, important pieces that were going to get walled in. We were FaceTiming with inspectors so that they can see the rough inspections, and making sure everything was recorded and digitally recorded and digitally mapped, so that we could go back into this very large building and pinpoint exactly where anything might be if there was ever an issue or a problem, as well as communicating with groups that normally do everything face-to-face. Construction is almost entirely face-to-face. Inspections are entirely face-to-face. Even plan reviews tend to be face-to-face, and we had to do the entire thing virtually, except for the people physically swinging the hammers. That the technology didn't exist very long ago. We couldn't have done that, right? So it could have taken us twice as long to build that building, or not gotten to start at all, had we not had modern technology and phones that allow us to communicate really in an instant and very accurate.
I completely agree with that. So, I mean, after talking to you and doing my research, what I've learned that you do projects from your heart, and I mean you're so invested in it. So my next question is, if one of your buildings could tell your story, what would it say about the values and vision you brought to it?
Relentlessness. Relentlessness. I mean, truly, I've been working on that project for 12 years, right? It's up and open, and I don't do much with it now, but it took me almost 10 years from starting to look at that piece of property, that piece of dirt, to getting it constructed, right? Mural Park, we started this process getting to know Pilsen in 2014. It was 2016 before we identified a project that we wanted to do and we felt was feasible, right? And now we're sitting here in 2025, and I'm 75% leased up, having gone through 4 years of real misery, fighting to keep it, fighting to preserve my investors' investment, fighting to honor the promises I made my tenants and the community. So I think resilience, persistence, and faith, because you have to have faith in these things, and you can only really have faith in something you're passionate about, that has a purpose for you, that has a purpose in its own right. So I don't know if I've fully answered that question, but I think it's a story of resiliency and persistence, and belief in what we do is important.
Sure. Amazing. So when people look back at your career, what do you want them to remember, and why does that matter to you?
Oh, it's a good question, because my career has been, it was bookended from 9/11, 2001, to the COVID, and with the COVID pandemic, right? With the Great Recession and several wars in between. I mean, and kind of global conflicts. All right. And now we're in like new unseen territory with the United States policy, and uh, the distance between the states and the federal government, and where the globe is going. So I hope that what I've done to date is a drop in the ocean compared to what I hopefully can affect going forward. We are starting to do new business, new services. We're not just doing private development for our own sake. We're now working with municipalities to help them unleash the billions of dollars, maybe trillions of dollars of publicly owned land that is grossly underutilized and undervalued, so that the residents of those communities, whether it's a small city like Evanston, who we have a contract with right now, putting assets to work, or larger cities like Chicago, who have hundreds of acres in the city of Chicago that are vacant. Um, I want to bring real regenerative growth and development to these communities. In particular, I'm focused on the idea of climate hedging and climate migration because, and ranging from Chicago to Boston, right? All along the Great Lakes, Cleveland, Rochester, Syracuse, these cities are experiencing rebirths. They're calling for urbanization. They're calling for new residents. While in the South, they're drowning and they're parched, right? There's no water, or there's too much water. There's overpopulation, and the investments are unstable. And insurance companies are starting to realize that. Big institutions are starting to realize that. They're starting to pull out of these markets where there's constant threat of climate risk, of damage to their assets. Even up all the way up the coast to New York. Look at what happened to LA this past year. So these climate effects are real. And we have this incredible urban infrastructure, transportation, and sister cities, and fresh water, and generally fairly mild climate along the Great Lakes, right? And the Northeast. Um, and I hope, in my view of my career today, that I will be a part of pushing this forward to affect social, environmental, and physical change within our existing urban fabric, right? To preserve the environment that's natural around us and build with what we already have, um, so that we can allow people opportunities to move from states where they're at greater risk to locations where they can thrive with a lower cost of living, a lower environmental risk, a higher social value, right? Than some other locations. And I hope that my vision for that today becomes a reality as we move forward and see where things go.
Sure, I'm sure it will. So, I mean, listening to you, you have a totally different approach like other developers have. So, what I've seen that some developers still only think about location and rent. What do you wish they understood better?
So yeah, I think that if they realize that if they were to engage with the community honestly, right, earnestly, and build in a thoughtful and authentic um, program, again, whether it's investing directly or into an affordable housing fund or something else, that engagement would go a lot further in their entitlement process in particular. But I also think, and I think that we've proven that it would go a lot further with the people they service, their residents, their tenants, right? When things are hard, right, and you don't have a connection, you haven't built the relationship. A tenant just represents a check, and the check just goes to the mortgage. Then that makes things more difficult to work with. When there is a buy-in, whether it's a residential buy-in or a commercial buy-in, where a tenant, a user of your property, um, is aligned with you in some of your philosophy, then you can get through tougher times, right? And then you don't lose that tenant. Then you don't have to replace that tenant. You don't have to spend those extra resources. So relatively small resources up front get cut out that could go to community benefit, and in the long run get paid back tenfold um, through these things, through the resiliency that's created. While most developers, they cut every penny, and they're driven to, they're pushed to by the industry, by their investors, by their lenders. Um, that Yeah, but there are still resources there that can be garnered. There's effort, or there's just personal work. If I'm going to be on site running a project every day, I should know the store owners that work around there. I should know the residents that live around there, and I can hear what they need. And if it's as simple as, oh, my daughter's having her sweet 16, can I use your lobby as an event space? Sure. Great. Next thing we know, 2019, Time Out names us one of the best event spaces in Chicago. like, like this is a natural idea that came up just by that interaction. So you can build trust and authentic relationships without giving away the house, without jeopardizing the financial feasibility of your project. If you have to jeopardize the financial feasibility of your project, it's not going to happen. You're not going to do it, right? And let's just be realistic about it. It isn't charity. Nobody's giving anybody money to go do go do things and not return the money. This is a business that we have to run, and there's a lot of risks. And I think we're mitigating risks by approaching it the way we're doing it, right? So by mitigating risks, that gives our investors the same return as somebody else building an office building next door, theoretically, on paper anyway, right? But will it work out that way, right? Did I mitigate risks that those people didn't even consider were there? Did I mitigate risks that I didn't know were there, right? Just one neighbor who wants to be a real, pain because they're really fearful of what's coming, and they make a lot of noise, and they call, if they were to, cause issues, it could have been resolved by respecting that person's right in the first place, right? And understanding where they are coming from in the first place. So it's that risk mitigation, I think, is really a key part of what we do. That builds up into a better project, right?
Well, what advice would you give to a younger developers who want to build smarter and more resilient projects?
I think the best advice I can give to a young anyone, right, is to start where you are. Don't helicopter into Austin because you heard Austin was this great city and try and build something that's not, that's beyond your reach. It's start on your block. Look to see what's needed, where the gaps are. It's start in your main street, your downtown, the place where you could be or should be or do go to eat and get a haircut and visit, and hang out with friends. Pay attention to your local environment. It will inform you what it needs. And when it informs you what it needs, and if you can find the resources to provide it, you're going to do well, right? And be patient in establishing yourself there, and be patient in growing your business. Do things that matter, because it's a hard job, right? It's a hard job. So it's got to matter, or you're going to burn out. You're going to go a different direction. You're going to lose money, or you're going to lose focus. And it's going to be a really hard road, right? So I think that's the best advice I could give somebody that wants to start doing this. Start with something you can feasibly do, and start with somewhere really, really well, right? That is what real estate is all about.
That was a great advice. I mean, real estate is all about patience and hard work, and you got to do it. So before starting any project, what's the one question every developer should ask themselves?
Can I finance it? It's maybe a simple answer, and maybe it may seem obvious, but we do nothing in this business without money. And it is this the cold, hard truth about it. As you are considering any and every project, you must understand your capacity to finance it. And we all reach, from time to time, but it's important you only have so much time. You only have so much effort, right? And especially when we're approaching projects the way we do, where there's all this upfront effort, right? That there's no payoff of in an immediate sense. We can't design something that isn't going to get built. Like I couldn't come to Pilsen and design a 5-star hotel just because I love Pilsen and I would like to stay here, like when, in luxury as a guest. That doesn't work, right? It wouldn't be financeable. So while we approach everything from a sociological standpoint first, in the end, the question of financing is the End of the conversation if the answer is no. Oh.
So, one question. What paperwork or approvals, like in general, like an overview about approvals do you need before you can start building something?
Well, that depends on a lot. So we are specialists in entitlements and public engagement, which means that I've talked enough about how we engage the community, right? But then we have to work through the legal aspects of what we do, which is zoning. And what does an underlying zoning allow? And then if there are ideas are different than what's allowed with the underlying zoning, um, what can we change that underlying zoning? Is there public support for changing underlying zoning in order to better the project, to make a better, more well-rounded project, or a use that nobody had thought of 50 years ago when we wrote our zoning code that is now new? Data centers are a good example of that, right? So we have to go through that legal process of understanding the zoning. That zoning then translates into an architectural plan that reflects the law into a physically built environment, right? And then you can apply for a review, a site plan review, and ultimately a building permit, right? So it's a long process of understanding what you want to do, understanding the legality of being able to do it, and how you can work within that system, um, and then working with the professionals at the city and the elected officials as well, um, to make sure that you're designing something that's legally buildable and financially feasible. Um, and then you have to get a building permit, right? Which includes a number of different engineers, and really, can be very sophisticated design, can be very simple, depending on it could be a single house or it could be a 50-story building. You still have the same components, they're just lesser and smaller, in each. Um, and then, then you got to work, you got contracts with contractors, contracts with architects and designers. So there's actually, they used to say, buildings were built on paper, right? Not with bricks and mortar. Now it's all digital, so you can't really call it paper anymore. But um, it really is a systematic approach that you have to learn the process, learn the law, become an expert in your location and the zoning law in your location, get to know the public officials, get to know the sentiment. And if something's outdated or needs to be addressed, bring that up and talk through that, how that might work. And then you've got to rewrite it, and help the city rewrite it and resubmit it and get it voted on by city council. So it's a lot of work. I would highly recommend that people try and find zoning lots that are already allow for what they want to do, if they can find it within the area that they want to do it, because it cuts down tremendously on upfront risk and upfront expenses, from that perspective.
Great, greatly good. So, Michael, what's your take on tech integration, like technologies like automated parking systems, HVAC systems, or smart lock systems or smart lighting systems in the project? So, what's your take on that?
I love it. Um, it's getting there. The technology isn't quite there, or it's quite expensive, for full building integration. But there's amazing products out there, um, that are pushing they're escalating the livability of a building, right? They're making something that is bricks and mortar more functional and more alive, and in ways more part of your life when you're out of it than it used to be, right? When your mail gets delivered, or you can let your mother-in-law in when she shows up, from the airport, and you're still at work, or you can count on your packages not being stolen in apartment buildings and things like that. Um, you know, the door systems, the security systems are all getting better and more integrated. But what technology companies really have to start to understand, in my opinion, is that is the buildings are still about the people that we use them. And a lot of tech firms fall into this place where they talk about products on products, and we're in a world that just layers products on top of products. But in the end, it's about the user, right, who's experiencing that. So as the tech grows and as it learns, because real estate tech is one of the slowest, right, to come up into our lives as a regular user. Um, we need to continue to evolve that technology to understand that the built environment is all around us and we interact with it every moment of every day. But we are interacting with it, right? Physically. So we're not interacting with it necessarily through a phone, right? Through an app. Um, so if we can make the tech, make the physicality of everything better, smoother, more convenient, more luxurious, more affordable, right? That's where that intersection, I think, really starts to work. Um, and I think there's some groups out there that are really trying to address that. Um, but they also have to learn to change their habits and think about their own space differently. Thinking about an apartment is not just some door you lock on your way out, right? And then you unlock and you sleep in on your at the end of the day. It's thinking about a piece of your life that is now accessible to you 24 hours a day, no matter where you are, through smart apps, right? So what does that mean, and where does that go? And I don't have the answers to those things, but those are the questions that I would be asking if I were a tech person approaching the real estate sector.
So have you ever used these kind of like all these technologies in your projects? Like, or have you thought of like automated parking systems or stackers or HVAC systems or small locks or small lighting systems?
We've looked at the automated parking systems. Um, the city of Chicago currently is not really favorable to them. There's other cities that are much earlier adopters of those complicated robotic systems and stuff. I think they're fantastic for certain uses. I think they're risky and cumbersome for other uses. Um, so they're fine. I mean, they're being used all over the world, and I think it's great. I think Chicago may start to evolve to those, but probably to reuse our existing parking garages, which are now completely underutilized, right? So if we've stopped building parking, which for the most part in Chicago we have stopped building parking, I think technology will help us utilize better the spaces that we currently are underutilizing, um, and bring those back to a new purpose. I also think they allow us to condense parking, so we're using a lot less real estate, a lot less concrete, like a lot less environmental resources, a lot less money to park what we need to park. In that instance, with the parking lot, and cities like Evanston have considered having parking maximums instead of parking minimums. Um,
Mhm.
Chicago has greatly reduced its parking requirements and continues to embrace transit-oriented development. We're in a region that's really well situated with transit. Not everyone else is. In Evanston, it took me 3 years to convince the city council to let me build a building with no parking, and I
Mhm.
finally built it. Um, Called Centrum Evanston. We sold it. It's now called the Scholar. It's 101 units, no parking. So um, we took years to convince everybody, and it leased up in 9 months, and it's never been vacant. Like, even through the pandemic, people still wanted to live there. People are making decisions to live without cars. They're good financial decisions to live without a car if you can, and if you can't, there are plenty of options that accommodate cars, right? That you can go and live in those accommodations. Um, so I think embracing less cars, embracing more walkability, more livability, more locality, is the future of our cities. It has to be. It's more environmentally friendly and sustainable, um, and um, it's just not necessary to put our so many resources into a vehicle. And I got 2 kids. I need a vehicle, right? But I didn't until I was 36, right? I didn't really need a vehicle. And now with car sharing and that technology, and soon we're going to have automated cars on the streets, you really don't need to own something and to park it, right? To embrace that urban environment. So I'm all for buildings without any parking. as long as it's appropriate and in the right spot.
Before we close up, what's the best place for people to follow your work or get in touch with you?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my most active space. We have a website, condorpartners.net. But I would invite everybody to follow me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I utilize it often, and I find it to be a very valuable tool for my work. So my email is on our company website. Happy to receive an email, although LinkedIn may get more attention because there's less clutter than my email.
Thank you, Michael. Good to have you. That was a great conversation with you. Build something that lasts long after you've gone. So that's what I've learned from you. So this was Real Talk. See you next time.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.